or the elderly health care. Now, those programs theoretically shouldn't have started, and they're not working. If we continue to do this, they're all going to come crashing down. But if we want to work our way out of it, we have to say where we're going to cut, and we should get the people, right, left, center, independents, to agree that coming home and stop spending this money overseas during these wars would be the easiest place. Cut these others and try to preserve these programs and let people get weaned off. For instance, I think it would be just great if we did this and offered everybody that's coming out of college right now and having a tough time, if you wanted to assume responsibility for yourself, to stay out of the Social Security system and keep your own money and take care of yourself. Were rather clear about the foreign policy. Their strong suggestion was that we have friendship and trade with as many countries as possible, any that are willing. Now, so often I will be charged, and you will as well, and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists. You don't want to deal with the world. Oh, yeah, we want to trade with the world. We want to travel. We want to go back and forth. We want to engage. And the individuals who have the sharpest criticism and call us isolationists are the ones who are the very first ones to put on sanctions on countries trying to start another war. And they're the very same people who won't even entertain the thought that it's time to start talking to the Cubans and travel to Cuba and invest, and no more sanctions on Cuba. I think when big, rich countries like ours that have all the military might more than all the other countries get together, and we intimidate small little countries, third world countries, with sanctions and threats, I think it's a sign of insecurity. We shouldn't be insecure. We have so much strength, but we will become insecure if we continue to do this, because our economy will not sustain us. Big governments and empires and countries that overextend overseas are usually never defeated militarily, and we're not going to be defeated militarily. We have the military might, but just think, in our lifetime, I mean, the Soviets didn't have to be defeated. When I was in the Air Force in the 60s, believe me, it was a pretty hot Cold War at the time, and we had the missile crisis in Cuba and these other things. But the way the Soviets were defeated, they defeated themselves, and when they were defeated for economic reason, they collapsed upon themselves. And that is what's happening to this country. The biggest threat is here at home. It's not foreign, it's domestic. He says, I know. I said, you know, there's going to be some bad stuff in this. He says, yeah, I know that. I said, why are you going to vote for it? He says, well, how am I going to go home and explain to my constituents that I voted against the Patriot Act right after 9/11? I said, why don't you? I said, that is what your job is. Go vote right and go home and explain it to them what you're supposed to be doing. But instead, we have continued the process. Not only has it been the Patriot Act, we have the part of the National Defense Authorization Act, where the military now is authorized to arrest American citizens held in secret without an attorney and indefinitely. So let's put that high on the list for repeal as well. Once we get in the repealing mood, we'll repeal that Obamacare as well. And if we repeal government care, what we have to do is get the government out of the way and allowing you to make your own decisions about your medical care. That is, get the government and the drug companies out of your way for picking alternative health care and nutritional products and vitamins. We want to advance the cause of liberty to such an extreme that we want to return to the times when we were allowed to drink raw milk if we wanted to. And if an individual happens to be ill and have heard that growing certain substances in their backyard can help them, let them do it. those conditions, both left and right should understand something about states' rights. The federal government has no right to come in and overrule the laws of California that permit you to do such things. This nanny state legislation we have is based on the assumption that the government can protect you against yourself. The government can't protect us against ourselves, and if it tries, it does it at the expense of liberty. One. Okay, I think it's okay. I would have to suspend my speech, and I'm just getting started. Now, what we want people to do is make up their own minds about how they live their lives with one very strict rule. You can't hurt other people. You can't take other people's property. But it's your life. But another basic premise of this is that if you mess up, it's your responsibility, and you can't go begging your neighbor or forcing your neighbor to take care of you. You know, in many ways, we accept this. This is very clear, you know, when it comes to some very important issues like our spiritual life, trying to understand the hereafter. We believe the government has nothing to say about this. So we can practice our religion the way we want, the various religions. The government should stay flat out of it. And if a person chooses not to practice a religion, that also should be legal in this country too. Things come out of religious beliefs. Sometimes very, very bizarre, dangerous things come out of intellectual beliefs and political beliefs. But we don't outlaw political beliefs. We're still allowed to read them and study them. How do we counteract bad political views? With the correct and positive political views. That's how we do it. But why is it that we as a nation have accepted the notion that as soon as it comes to putting something in our bodies or in our lungs, we have accepted the notion that the government has authority over us, telling us now what to eat and drink and how much salt to have, the whole thing. What happened to us? Why are we such wimps? Why don't we take our liberty back? It's the Goldman Sachs of the world, it's the banking system, the military-industrial complex, the whole mess. They feel entitled, and they throw the crumbs to the poor, and then when there's a crisis, the rich get bailed out, and the poor get poorer, the middle class loses their jobs, and they end up losing their houses as well. So this is the reason why we have to challenge the whole notion of the entitlement system. You're entitled to your freedoms, and the government should be protecting your liberties, not pretending it can redistribute wealth and create wealth by doing it. It destroys wealth under those conditions. So very simply, in order to restore a sound economy and get jobs back here again, I think we should cut spending. But that's such a strange idea in Washington. Even our side of the aisle has a proposal to look like they're cutting spending, but they're only cutting proposed increases. In the next 10 years, the proposed increases are about $10 trillion. So if they cut them down to $9 or $8 trillion, say, oh, look, we just cut $2 trillion. I want to cut it. I want to cut $1 trillion of real money in the first year in office. People worry about it and they say, oh, won't that cause a crash in the economy and this will really wreck things? You can't do that. But what about saving all this money on the wars? Wouldn't that be a good place to start? In the last 10 years, there was $4 trillion added to our debt by fighting these wars overseas. Now, the founders had a good way of restraining us from getting involved in war. They simply wrote into the Constitution that only Congress can declare the war, and which means that Congress is the closest to the people, so the people have a say through their congressmen whether or not we will make this precise declaration of going to war. Since World War II, we haven't done it. Since World War II, we haven't won a war. Since World War II, we've spent trillions of dollars and loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of thousands of people injured. And just think of the tragedy of the injured that's coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan now. If you look at what kind of lives that we have lost in the last 10 years since 9/11, Americans, soldiers and contractors, we've lost 8,500. That's not a fair deal. I understand 9/11 very, very well, but going into a policy where we spend a lot of money, bankrupt ourselves, and a lot of Americans get killed, that's not very good payback. We need to wise up and have a different type of foreign policy. War on the world by a global war on terrorism. Terrorism is a monstrous thing to deal with, but by marching around the world believing that we have the moral authority to bomb any country, any place, because there might be a terrorist hiding behind a bush, and having secret weapons and having drone missiles directed from individuals in the United States and going over, and guess what? We make mistakes. I mean, do we know that we kill the right people? No. We know that a lot of children and a lot of innocent people die, and we know that every time you kill one over there under those circumstances, you probably create another 100 who's saying, why are we being terrorized by bombs falling out of the sky? We haven't done anything to the Americans. There's every reason in the world why we can cut a lot of money out of the military. We can have priorities. If we continue to do what we're doing, we're going to bring in the destruction of the currency, and even the Social Security recipients and the elderly getting medical care and the children's health care and the education program, they will come crashing down, because when the money doesn't work, nothing works. So we could work our way out of it, but we can't do it by spending more money and printing more money. It won't work, and I think the American people know it, that it can't work. So my idea of cutting $1 trillion sends a message that we're going to get our house in order. We can start with overseas spending. We don't need to give away foreign aid. I'm convinced that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in this country and giving it to rich people in poor countries. Up to be a political football, and it doesn't help the people it's supposed to help over there. It helps the government. And besides, if we're a very wealthy country and doing well and setting an example, we as individuals can decide where to send our money and help the people truly in need. Even in the midst of this recession, the American people have been very generous. There's still crises around the world, and the American people come. It's so much better than depending on government bureaucrats and special interests doing these kind of things. So we can make these cuts. If we do this, the other suggestion I have is going back to the 2006 budget. And the government wasn't too small in 2006. It was still rather big, so it's not like we're destroying the whole government. We're just going back to a more modest time and getting rid of a few departments, like say 5 of them to begin with.